I'm Mike Huckman at the Bio Bus Center, and it is a pleasure to welcome the head of BARDA, Dr. Rick Bright. Dr. Bright, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So for those who are not familiar with the acronym, tell us what BARDA is and what BARDA does.
BARDA is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. BARDA was created to work with private industry to develop vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics, anything that might come into play when we're exposed to a chemical or biological or radiological or nuclear attack or an emerging infectious disease such as Zika or Ebola or pandemic influenza. Before BARDA was created, many of these products that we need for these responses just languished and didn't move forward towards FDA approval so they could be used in these emergency situations. So BARDA was created by Congress to accelerate that, remove the barriers, go very, very quickly so we can have these countermeasures available when we need them.
So Dr. Bright, speaking of Zika, which you just mentioned, where do things stand in terms of the development of a vaccine? Because even though it's disappeared off the front pages, not in the news as much as it used to be, it's still a threat in certain parts of this country.
While we haven't seen a lot of the virus emerging yet from the country we even saw it in last year, the threat is still there. It's very, very real. If you're a young couple wanting to start a family and you could travel to these areas and potentially be exposed to the Zika virus. So it's critical that we have a vaccine. We're working very hard with a number of different companies, collaborating with our National Institutes of Health and our Center for Disease Control to accelerate the development of a vaccine that could be used in a woman or man before she becomes pregnant to reduce her chance of getting infected by Zika virus and that Zika virus then infecting the fetus. We're also working really hard with industry to develop diagnostics. We know who is infected, when they're infected, and what risk they might be at in actually getting infected if they're pregnant.
Before Zika, of course, it was Ebola. What's next? What is the next outbreak that we haven't heard of that we are not seeing on our radar screen right now?
It's a billion-dollar question. I wish I had an answer. I mean, there are a number of groups that have a crystal ball, and I don't really like to use a crystal ball.
Why?
We can't predict what's going to come our way. And nature has a way of changing even what we know, and man also has a way of tweaking things that we might know. So it's really important, instead of focusing on a particular virus or particular bacteria, particular threat, that we focus on a capability to respond to anything that might come our way, building capabilities within our country and around the world that can identify a pathogen, a virus, a bacteria very, very quickly, and drop that into their production system and make a vaccine or a diagnostic or a monoclonal antibody or therapeutic that can be used for whatever comes our way. It's a shift from a crystal ball approach, which we'll probably never get right, to a capabilities-based approach so we can respond quickly to anything.
And that's what you're embarking on now at BARDA?
That's a primary focus at BARDA. It's a primary focus across the government in the United States to build these regulatory systems and production systems so we can have them ready when we need them.
But Dr. Bright, what sometimes gets lost in the hyper-focus on outbreaks like Zika and Ebola is the backdrop of the flu, which is still a big and potentially fatal threat.
Yes.
And there are vaccines that are available, but most people don't get them.
Influenza is probably the greatest threat we'll face in our lifetime. I mean, a number of famous people have been quoted, and you can add me to the list when I become famous, but you're more likely to die of a pandemic influenza infection than probably any other threat that we face. There's not enough vaccine, there's not enough drug, there's not enough diagnostic. Even though we have a vaccine for seasonal influenza, the influenza that comes around every year, we're not really good at predicting what the pandemic vaccine strain might be. Therefore, we have a large push to develop what is known as a universal flu vaccine, a flu vaccine that will protect you from any strain of influenza virus that might emerge. Now, the problem and challenge of getting people to take that vaccine is on the other end of the spectrum. We do have really good influenza vaccines, but the uptake of those vaccines, not only in the United States, but around the world, isn't anywhere near where it needs to be. So we need to work with the Center for Disease Control and public health experts to make sure people are educated and aware of the benefits of the influenza vaccine and how it will protect them, save the lives of their children and of their parents, and also develop a better flu vaccine so we don't have to change this and give you a shot every single year.
But
one shot for life.
How do you do that in an environment where on social media there is blowback regarding the safety and the efficacy of vaccines?
No vaccine is perfect. It's very frustrating to hear and see this rhetoric because we need to educate people about the power and the benefit of vaccines. Vaccines have done nothing short of changing the entire course of human history, but not everyone sees that because they might be close to an individual situation or an individual case where maybe the vaccine didn't provide benefit, even a vaccine that might have caused harm in an individual. And those cases get blown up and they crowd out the space in the media that's hiding the real benefit of the vaccines as we know them today.
Dr. Bright, we've talked a lot about vaccines. Now let's move on to another area in your purview, and that is the issue of antibiotic resistance. There are many companies here at the Bio Convention that either have brought new antibiotics to physicians and hospitals and patients, and others that are working on that right now. How urgent is that need?
It's an absolutely urgent need. There has not been enough attention paid to this in the last 40 or 50 years. There hasn't been a new gram-negative antibacterial drug developed in 50 years. And so we look at that very carefully in BARDA and we ask ourselves why? Where is the bottleneck in the development pipeline? It's not in the number of early stage candidates that are being generated in research labs around the world, but it's in the incentives for an industry partner to develop those through licensure, through approval from the FDA. And so we look at the incentive structure, the marketplace entry incentives, to try to encourage the manufacturers to develop antibiotics. Now, the crux of the matter is, if you develop a new antibiotic, I also want to discourage you from using that because it's the only drug that we know the more you use it, the less effective it becomes. And so the government and other private investors need to work with industry to identify those marketplace entry incentives that will allow them to recoup their investment when a drug is approved and reuse that money back in the development pipeline, at the same time encouraging stewardship and promoting use of those drugs in extreme cases only. And so it's a different business model, it's a different incentive model than anything we've ever tried to develop. Last year, BARDA collaborated with the Wellcome Trust Foundation and with the National Institutes of Health to launch what we call CARB-X. It's a Combating Antibiotic Bacteria Resistance Accelerator. It's the first time of any place, anywhere in the world, a public-private partnership of this size devoted to discovering new antibiotics. With this, we offer technical training to industry partners developing antibiotics. We offer business development training so they understand the business model, and we're looking for those incentives to carry them all the way through development, keep them on their feet, allow them to have a benefit, a reward once they develop that, recoup those costs in the development pipeline, all the while the government has access to those drugs. Truly innovative model. It's never been done before. We're grateful for our partners, and we think it's going to have a huge impact on the development of new antibiotics.
Great. So new things happening at BARDA on the antibiotic resistance front as well as on the vaccine front. The theme of this year's convention is breakthrough. So Dr. Bright, breakthrough to what?
It's a beautiful theme. It can mean many things. I believe breakthrough is important to decentralize healthcare and empower the patient. It's time that we reduce the gap between the science and the end user and the patient. And so breakthrough in technologies and innovation that allow patients to have more information, allow us to have more information about a disease, when and where it's occurring, and allow people to make individual choices on how to play a role in stopping the spread of that outbreak. It's a breakthrough in technology innovation and also the regulatory process that govern those interactions that I believe is going to make us all a safer and healthier world.
That's Dr. Rick Bright, the head of BARDA, here at the BioBuzz Center.